So thank you to Courtney Brenner, Amy Gannon, and Andrew Zisser for contributing to our panel today.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Courtney Brenner, and I work for the UW Center for Cooperatives, and I'm going to be the moderator for the Food System Producer Co-ops panel. So welcome, and I just want to introduce our speakers quickly, and then I will hand it over to them. So the first co-op we're going to talk about today is the Lancaster Farm Fresh Cooperative, and Christian Hunold and Melanie Jeske will be presenting. Christian teaches comparative politics and environmental politics in Drexel's undergraduate political science program, as well as public policy graduate courses for the Center for Public Policy. His current research interests encompass urban sustainability issues and the politics of renewable energy. He is also an editor for Environmental Politics, which is an environmental studies journal. Melanie is, I just lost her bio, sorry. She is an undergraduate student at Drexel University pursuing 2 Bachelor of Science degrees in economics and in environmental studies. Our third presenter is Esteban Kelly. He's a current staff member and former board member of Mariposa Food Co-op, and the former vice president of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, and a current board member of the National Cooperative Business Association. And he was recently elected as the vice president of NASCO, which is North American Students of Cooperation. Esteban is a member owner and core trainer with Aorta, a collective of facilitators and consultants that brings an analysis of anti-oppression and social justice in their work to increase the capacity of co-ops and organizations for economic justice and a solidarity economy. In addition to co-op organizing, he is pursuing a doctoral degree in cultural anthropology at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York, where he is studying how urbanization in Sao Paulo mobilizes land, housing, expertise, and social movements around conflicting ideologies of space. As an active community organizer in West Philadelphia, he works with the Philly Stands Up Collective on transformative justice and sexual assault issues and the Life Center Association Community Land Trust. So now I will turn it over to them.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of general context of our case study and say something fairly basic about the co-op, and then Melanie will go into the analysis a little bit. We'll hope that division works for everybody. So Lancaster Farm Fresh Co-op is a co-op of about 80 family-owned farms in Lancaster County. You see sort of a map of the region here. Lancaster is the sort of southwestern slice there, a largely agricultural farming county in the Philadelphia region. All of the members are old order Amish and Mennonite farms, which makes this co-op a little bit unusual, perhaps. And the primary purpose of the co-op is to essentially sort of connect sort of traditional family farms and farmers who largely for religious, cultural reasons wish to limit their contact with mainstream American society, to sort of connect them to a farm-to-table, direct-to-consumer marketing model. So the co-op really provides professional services, both in terms of revamping the farming operations, about which I'll say a little bit more in a minute, but more importantly, providing the sort of interface in terms of websites and transportation and distributing the goods to consumers, most of whom are in Philadelphia County as essentially the largest sort of customers. Obviously correlates just basically with population, where the population centers are, but the co-op has customers throughout essentially the southwestern Philadelphia, Pennsylvania region, as well as in New York and Delaware and Maryland and Washington, D.C. So what's driving this in terms of the larger sort of sociological cultural background here is population growth in the Amish community, right? Amish families typically have 5 to 6 children on average. There are huge development pressures in Lancaster County in terms of urbanization, shrinking farmland, and so on. Only about, based on the sort of research I'm familiar with, only about 1 in 7 Amish children leave the community, which leaves most people within the community, and so the population sort of doubles every 20 years at the moment. And obviously that creates problems for the traditional farming way of life. There's only so much land you can give to your sons and daughters. To your sons, obviously, it's a very patriarchal culture. The sort of outside of the community professions are limited by limited education, right? Sort of mechanical work and welding and horseshoeing and those kinds of things. Maybe working in hotel and restaurant service jobs, obviously with sort of an 8th grade education. So what's been happening, to make a long story short, is that the farms are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They keep subdividing their farms, buying new land as well. They're also sort of migrating to other areas in the Midwest and so on, but obviously population pressure, limited land creates some issues for farming. So the farms are getting smaller, and one way to deal with that is to move into specialized production, right? To move away from any kind of commodity crops to sort of high quality, high value, high added value produce production, as well as dairy and meat and so on. And so what the co-op does is essentially sort of help teach farmers how to do that. And so in this region, many Amish and many Mennonite farmers have sort of discovered the high-end urban sort of CSA, Reading terminal market sort of outlets for urban consumers as a way to survive, as a way essentially to keep family farming viable. Then you have the farm, then people can stay on the farm and work there instead of having to go out. It helps sort of the cohesion of the community. So that's sort of the general background for this, in the context in which Lancaster Farm Fresh is thriving. They have about somewhere between 400 and 500 CSA shares in Philadelphia this year. The cost, depending on whether it's a half or full share, is anywhere from sort of $400 to $600. They have their own little fleet of rented trucks. Again, they're rented because owning trucks is sort of problematic for Amish communities. One of the other things I should say about this case study is that the results are very, very preliminary. They have essentially sort of declined to participate in this research. Casey Spacht, who is a Mennonite, has shown some interest, but has been then pretty reluctant, and for reasons I don't entirely understand, has not participated today. I've been sort of mobilized some of my Mennonite hunting buddies in Lancaster County to get in touch with him, but I don't seem to have a particularly good in to his particular co-op. So the research is based essentially sort of on public sources, and he does give interviews, and he's not shy. He's also not sort of camera shy or publicity shy in any sort of way. So there's a lot of public information out there that we're able to use and try to put together in some sort of coherent fashion. So again, I think that in terms of the co-op's purpose, it is essentially to provide, I would say, business, marketing, distribution, as well as farming expertise services to the farmers. It helps convert existing farms into sort of certified organic, CSA-oriented production. There's some coordination among the farms about who grows what and so on, obviously to maximize that season, all that sort of CSA stuff that you need to be doing well. And then it is really to sort of acquire customers essentially in cities all over this region who will buy CSA shares, although they also sell to retail outlets and to restaurants and so on, do all the kinds of things that direct farm-to-table marketing farmers tend to do. Yeah, and I'll turn over to Melanie.
So as Kristen sort of stated, the Lancaster Farm Fresh sort of exists to bring these multiple, nearly 80 different farms together to sort of expand their footprint and make each farm slightly more viable. Can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah? Okay, great. So there are sort of, after looking at this in a bunch of different ways, we sort of identified 3 different avenues that are taken through this formation of the co-op to sort of increase the viability of each of the farms. And those 3 are, and as I go through each of them, you'll sort of see that they are all sort of interconnected: market expansion, produce diversification, and then also profit maximization. And so on this first map, can you go back to this first one? Great. On the first map, you can see sort of where the little farm, that is where Lancaster Farm Fresh has its sort of headquarters, which is in Leola, PA, which is in Lancaster County. And you can tell on this map, the green sort of starts where there are the least number of shares to Philadelphia, where there are the most number of shares. And so by this map alone, you can see that the formation of this co-op has really increased the overall footprint of each of these farms through having pickup sites which require a minimum number of shares of 20 shares to cover transportation costs and costs of inputs. It allows each of these farms to maybe reach a market that they wouldn't have been able to reach otherwise. So that sort of covers market expansion. Second, it allows for produce diversification. One of the sort of obstacles that co-ops have to overcome is being able to offer as much as maybe a grocery store offers in their produce section. You can purchase a share for the summer, but maybe you won't get the produce that you really want to be eating all summer. And that's sort of something that people wrestle with when they're deciding if they're going to purchase a share or not. But through the number of farms that have kind of aggregated in the LFFC, you have that produce diversification. And so it becomes more attractive to consumers to purchase from this co-op because they can offer modified baskets to each consumer's need and then go from there and expand into all of these different areas. And then the third is profit maximization, and that sort of goes back to the pickup sites. The way LFFC designates pickup sites is that you have to have at least 20 shares purchased at that site in the Pennsylvania state. In other states, it's up to 30. And sort of the way they've determined how many shares are necessary is through looking at transportation costs. As Christian said, they do rent their trucks, but they're not going to go and deliver one CSA share every week all summer long somewhere where there's only maybe $400 coming in. That they would lose money on that. And so each of these sort of allows them to reach this broader area that's in 4 different states to really encompass a larger consumer base that increases the viability of the co-op as a whole, but also the individual farmers. Without the co-op structure, these farms wouldn't be able to reach each of these markets in Philadelphia, in New York City. And it's really because of this structure, which is, in this case, more of a business plan, a business kind of model, than it is about community building and economic development in this area that allows them to expand. And so really the economic development or the growth is kind of confined to just the members of the CSA, the member farmers, and then also the consumers who receive the benefit of the produce that's organic and fresh and cheaper than going to the store. It's delivered somewhere near them, whether it's at a community meeting hall, a private residence, or at a restaurant that they can go and pick it up there. There are all different types of pickup sites, but it's very convenient for the consumer, and then it's also helpful to each of the farms. So it's really less about economic development and community building in Leola, PA. It's more about extending the reach of this organic fresh produce to regions that may not have it without the existence of the CSA. So I think that's it. We can turn it over to you.
Great. I'm going to stand over there if that, is that cool?
You can do whatever you want.
Great. All right. I'll take my water with me. Okay, no slides. Here we go. I'm going to sort of be bouncing back and forth a little bit between reading my paper and just explaining some of the bits that can get a little bogged down if you just sort of read through them. So I'm not going to do that when we get to those moments. But just to start out, Organic Valley has a similar sort of purpose and is it's a producer-owned cooperative that markets 100% certified organic, and that's mainly dairy for Organic Valley food products. They were founded in 1988 in southwestern Wisconsin and headquartered in Lafarge, Wisconsin. Organic Valley links small family farms in 35 states at this point to retail markets across the U.S. In much the same way that we just heard about for Lancaster, for the purpose of sourcing eggs, meat, produce, juice, and dairy products, which includes milk, as well as butter, cheese, cream cheese, and all that other stuff. Their production activity involves everything from farmers who milk cows and grow crops to processing facilities and warehousing. Having grown considerably in their 25-year history, Organic Valley is the nation's largest producer of organic dairy products, boasting $715 million in sales in 2011. As a cooperative enterprise, the profits of these tremendous sales, which were, the profits were $18 million in the past fiscal year, 2011, are distributed among its 1,700 members and over 600 staff who collectively make up Organic Valley. As I'll discuss later, Organic Valley had a significant impact nationally. They influenced USDA policy on organic certification. They shifted the milk industry in terms of practices as early adopters of this UHT pasteurization process. That's one of those like nerdy details that I'll get into a little bit later. But that effectively allowed them to extend the shelf life of milk products and expand their market. And they also had a notable impact in sustaining small and family farms as economically viable producers in an age of large agribusiness. Nevertheless, as I'll get to at the very end, there remain within Organic Valley unresolved internal issues around diversity and democratic participation, as well as a broader question of corporate responsibility to make organic foods more accessible to people with limited food sovereignty. So to back it up a little bit, historically, Organic Valley was founded in the late 80s by small farmers and family farmers. There was a threat because the big agriculture industry was really just chewing up farms, as most of you are probably familiar with. And so there was sort of this economic imperative, this ultimatum that they either could join up and sort of be subsumed within large agribusiness or close up shop. And so there were 25 produce farmers in southwestern Wisconsin who really sought to create a third way, to create another option where they could stick around. And that was actually by converting their farms to be organic farms. That would allow them to charge a premium so that they would have enough capital to keep the farm going. So it actually came from an economic motivation. And shortly thereafter, the mythology goes that within a few weeks, 7 dairy farmers joined them, and they formed Organic Valley. Zip forward a little bit to the 1990s, organic market sort of started exploding in a very good way. The market took off. Organic Valley themselves expanded. They they started in Wisconsin. They crossed over to Minnesota and Iowa. And once they made that leap going beyond Wisconsin, that was sort of the biggest mental blockage. And then it was not a big deal to expand all the way to the West Coast and the East Coast. And part of that strategy for expanding is because of the larger markets, as we just heard was the case with Lancaster co-ops. So they recruited members and growers, farmers in Maine and Washington states who were closer to these larger organic markets on the East and West Coast, in California, all the way down through New England, Mid-Atlantic area. The basic structure for producer co-ops, as we heard a little bit about, is essentially to aggregate, because there's no other way really to have access to these larger markets if you are dispersed with all your different farms, whether they're family farms or just teeny tiny farms. So you pull together, you sell, you fix a price based on things. I'll get into that a little later as well. You determine a price, you bundle it together, and then you can sell it to larger retailers, grocery stores, even anchor institutions. In the instance of Organic Valley, they have, as I said, 1,700 small-scale producers as part of the co-op, and these are mostly white folks, 40% of whom, again, are Amish and Mennonite, and that is significant. In terms of the other demographics, they haven't done a full census internally on things like age, but there are general national statistics that have been compiled by USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, that the average age for organic farmers is 54, and for conventional farmers it's 58. So that's not a significant difference, but on average organic farmers tend to be younger, and I think that statistic is continuing to march younger and younger, with younger folks starting organic farms in urban and rural areas in this country. 88 to 90% of the sales for Organic Valley are in dairy. And so most of the membership, most of the statistics, most of the dynamics that I'm going to be talking about in their organization are coming from the perspective of their dairy farms, although they do have a broader product line. And their essential structure is they have an equity share. In order to buy in, that's about 5.5% of their average annual sales. So that's sort of the very basics of how they're structured. In order to join the cooperative, a dairy farmer, which again, it could be an entire family or an individual, would agree to sell 100% of their milk through the cooperative. Organic Valley in turn they agree to buy this milk at a fixed price per 100 pounds. So that's based on a 3-year average buying price for organic milk. Farmers benefit from this premium organic price, even if Organic Valley ultimately ends up selling the milk at a conventional price, as might occur if there were a surplus of organic milk on the market. This price difference is significant. The purchase price for certified organic milk is approximately $30 per 100 pounds of milk, compared to $17 per 100 pounds of milk for conventional milk. Purchase prices are set at the beginning of each year and are they rarely need to readjust them midway through the year. That adjustment happens on average just about once in a 10-year period, so it's very infrequently that comes to pass. There is a catch, of course, in this, which is that they're limited to, they're fixed at an upper limit of production. You can't just say, well, that's wonderful, you're going to pay me this premium price, I'm just going to flood the market with tons of organic milk and you're going to pay me a lot. There's sort of quotas that are set in place, and if you exceed that quota and you're like, well, this is what I made, they then only buy your milk at the conventional price, even if it is organic. And they'll continue to sell it for the organic price if they're able to, but at that point, you as a farmer are only getting $17 per 100 pounds instead of the $30 that you would be able to charge. So it incentivizes staying within that threshold. The equity investment in Organic Valley means that the producers themselves have material ownership in the processing mills and packaging warehouses that add value to their product as it makes its way to retail outlets. It also connects farmer members to administrative expertise of staff members. Organic Valley operates with a typical staffing structure headed by a CEO, or in this famous case some of you might know of George Siemens, the CIEIO, as in the old McDonald farm. That's actually his title. Underneath their CIEIO are over 600 employees, 350 of whom operate out of the headquarters in Lafarge, Wisconsin, and another 100 of whom are in Cashden, 50 in Chaseburg, and the rest are residential or regional sales and field staff that hold the system together by linking local sites to the broader Organic Valley network. The staff of the cooperative provide crucial financial, educational, and marketing resources to turn certified organics into the lucrative, high-quality commodity that drives the enterprise as a whole. So their board structures, they have 7 board members who have been very active from the get-go when it was just founding, and only recently have they begun to shift to more of a governance model instead of getting really deep into the operations side of things. Their board is process-heavy, and this is going to surprise you, even those of you who are from very local, very active cooperatives. They meet monthly, which isn't unheard of, but their monthly meetings are two days long. It's like having a retreat every month for their board. As I mentioned, they do have a substantial amount of Amish and Mennonite farmers who are their members. And this becomes an issue because Amish and Mennonites are adverse to voting. And what does that mean when you're in a cooperative that is based on a fundamental principle of democratic participation? So it's this very awkward line to walk for folks at Organic Valley. They try to do as much as they can to encourage folks, but in the process of member recruitment, they basically came to a mutual understanding that, at least for their Amish members, they would not bother them with sending ballots and encouraging them to vote. They literally are like, we want nothing to do with this. We don't even want to know when these elections are happening. This isn't specific to co-ops. Amish folks notably abstain from public policy, public debates. They don't vote in elections for the U.S. public offices. For Mennonite level members, many of them, their agreement is just, okay, you can send us a ballot, but don't expect us to fill it out. It's just going to sit in the mail. We'll recycle it or whatever we do. So that does raise some fundamental questions. Additionally, in terms of gender, a lot of these, as I mentioned, are farms. They're run by husband and wife teams. Oftentimes, their children are participating in the running of the farm. However, when it comes down to the actual votes, overwhelmingly, it is the men who are casting the votes and casting the ballots in their participatory process. In fact, their board, which I mentioned, has 7 seats total. It's never been there have never been more than 2 women on their board at any given time, and usually it is 6 or 7 out of the 7 seats are held by men. So there's a lot of stuff going on there as well. In terms of some of the things that matter to the customers of Organic Valley, most customers, and this surprised me in the research, actually don't care that it's a co-op. That's partially because they have such a large customer base. The thing that's important to them is that it's organic. That's the bit that matters most to them. And again, they were instrumental in designing and creating USDA standards for what even is organic. What is that definition? Organic Valley pushed those standards at the federal level, and so that's one of their biggest legacies. There was a huge controversy maybe about 10 years ago in Organic Valley around precisely this pasteurization process called UHT, or ultra-high temperature pasteurization. It's a process that had only been really adopted in Europe, and Organic Valley ultimately ended up adopting it after a lot of debate. The debate lied in the fact that this process allowed for the shelf life to be extended from 3 weeks to 6 weeks. So it essentially doubled the shelf life of their product. And their market research indicated that the number one factor in people deciding which milk to buy was, what's the date, when is it going to expire? And the longer that date is, the more likely they are to buy it. So wonderful. The problem is that after 3 weeks, the nutritional content and integrity of the milk rapidly just starts to kind of fall off a cliff. And so there was debate internally about, well, we really want to stand by the integrity of our nutrition and this product, and ultimately that side lost. Their adoption of this process, though, and their increased sales from being able to stay on the shelves longer, reach further and further markets, drove the whole industry to adopt this process. So that's now what virtually all major milk distributors do. I'm just going to jump ahead to some of my concluding thoughts around their member programs, community engagement, and some of the lingering questions. -1 minute. All right, I'll skip over most of that, I guess. Let's see, what's the important stuff? They have a member incentive programs where you can get bonuses by earning points. Every point sort of adds up. You can get up to a little over 100 points, and that can end up in something like $1,700, I think, is the maximum bonus that members can earn. They also invest a lot in local programs, education for their members, literacy programs. They have a profit share program where they take their profits, they divide it up, all the surplus from the year. 45% of that goes into their members, 45% goes to the Organic Valley employees, and the remaining 10% goes to community projects. Those are all over the place. It works like a grant system. Most of them are in southwestern Wisconsin, most of the recipients for that. So for example, in the past fiscal year, that was $18 million that was divided up in that way. My concluding thoughts. The commercial success of Organic Valley affords the co-op profits for internal employee development, co-op to co-op investment, and multifarious community projects. Nevertheless, being a large and multi-sided cooperative poses its fair set of challenges, primarily regarding cooperative branding to mainstream consumers, membership engagement internal to the business, and struggles with diversity and inclusion. This latter difficulty lies in shifting historical inertia from a producer co-op sector, which is agricultural, that is overly adapted to serving middle-class or middle-aged white men, despite the presence of women farmer members. Added to this, there's a need for rural communities of color to tap into the cooperative advantage that comes along with enterprises like Organic Valley. The Federation for Southern Cooperatives is evidence that this is a gainful prospect. If Organic Valley has managed to cultivate substantial membership base among Christian minority populations such as Amish and Mennonite farmers, why has there not been a robust effort to work with black farmers, particularly considering that black people form rural majorities in quite a number of agriculture-driven counties in the southeast United States? Furthermore, there's a lingering question of why Organic Valley hasn't played a larger role in expanding food access and food sovereignty among economically marginalized consumers. Given the influence of the co-op and its commitment to organic foods, it's curious that they have prioritized funding projects such as after-school recreational facilities rather than making a stronger push for school-aged youth to have access to healthy organic food in public school cafeterias. With the burgeoning profits of Organic Valley, one has to wonder why there aren't more intentionally funded subsidies to artificially reduce the expense of organic dairy and produce to low and moderate income communities who can't traditionally afford organics. Finally, while the ability of Organic Valley to compete with large-scale agribusiness is worthy of praise, it's unclear how the co-op has leveraged its size and principles to push the industry to be more accountable to the public, adopt humane and sustainable farming practices, or to downsize operations, let alone prompt a return to small farming. In offering economically viable sanctuary to surviving family farms, Organic Valley has towed a crucial and defensive line, giving unchecked multiplication of mega agribusiness pause. A greater act, and one that's desperately needed, would be to reverse the tide of eroding small American farms by daring to envision the dismantling of behemoth agribusiness and by asserting the exigency of the small farm. Both are necessary if American agriculture is to be sustainable, that's socially, economically, and ecologically. Thank you.
So we have about 20 minutes for questions. There are mics, as you all probably know, in both places, though if you think your voice will carry, feel free to stay in your seat and ask away.
So one was a clarifying question for the Lancaster ones. Are the farmers the member owners there, and is the CSA their only means within the co-op to connecting with the public, with the consumer?
Yes, there's sort of a website where you can I think one of the strong suits of this particular CSA when you compare it to other CSAs, which may or may not be co-ops, is that you can sort of customize what you get a little bit more, but you have to have bought a share. And then sort of become a member in that sense to get access to that sort of part of the website. So a general sort of member of the public couldn't buy from them unless you're a member. Maybe just an additional point on that, since Esteban talked about the affordability. They have a payment plan. So if you buy a partial sort of or vegetable only share, which I think is something like $400 and $425, you can pay that in 2 installments. Found out one of my students is a member. So I mean, it's not that the Drexel students are particularly poor necessarily, but still, it's not necessarily that you have to shell out the $700 or $800 in the beginning of the year like you do with a lot of CSAs. So they're doing something, obviously. Yes.
Interesting collaboration that's happened near us with a credit union is that they've are doing loans to their members for CSA shares, and then they can pay it back interest. But my main question was for either co-ops was, do you see a means structurally or how it's done to to deal with conflict amongst the members within the co-op? Like, I'm just curious if there's anything there. I know Organic Valley has had some challenges. Is there something that's structurally set up at all?
I mean, I can just sort of speculate a little bit because, again, we haven't been able to really do a lot of actual field work with either the general manager or the co-op members themselves. So, but there's a little bit of published history which suggests that one of the obstacles that needed to be overcome, and this is sort of interesting within the sort of Amish community. On the one hand, it's a very communitarian society where people help each other out. Somebody's barn burns down, right, and then people get together and they rebuild it in 3 weeks, even though it's potentially a competitor, right? So there was a little bit of resistance initially to get people to see, okay, the co-op, you're competing against each other, joining the co-op. But I think the sort of the economic success of it and access to these very lucrative markets, I think, seems to have convinced everybody that that's the way to go. So any sort of potential concern about the co-op not joining with your competitors doesn't seem to be a huge obstacle to forming the co-op and keeping it viable. And the other part of this is that there is a kind of, if not economic development, but kind of community building element to this, which is that the co-op seems to be crucial, at least this would sort of warrant further research, in terms of keeping families on these farms. And that is the overriding, that may be even more important to kind of making money to I would venture to sort of speculate that's actually more important to a lot of the farmer members than the profitability, which obviously matters as well. But this, you could argue that the co-op is what keeps these farms being farms as opposed to not.
So
The one thing I would say about Organic Valley that I didn't get to mention, and that actually surprised me, is that they run by consensus at all levels for this giant organization that's making millions of dollars.
Hence the 2-day retreats.
Right, hence the 2-day, right. So I think that, all of their committees function by consensus. I don't know the extent to which their staff functions by consensus or it's just sort of yes, boss. But, you're in rural Wisconsin. I think that there's a certain amount of acquiescence that's kind of going on there. But they do function. It's not a consensus -1. It's not voting. It's full consensus. So that's pretty powerful. And I think that model allows for dissenting opinion to have the time and be addressed with the level of concern that it merits, and for people to move forward with new proposals. So whatever decisions they made, even when they are contentious, have to be made by consensus, adopted by consensus. So I think that does ameliorate to some extent those internal sort of strife that might happen.
I have 2 questions. The first question is related to sort of transparency when you have these large producer cooperatives. Organic means something different at many different levels to many different people. And certainly when you're talking about dairy production, you're talking about organic versus pasture raised. They're hugely different. You can have an organic CAFO, and that's scary, but it can be done. So how does the transparency of the organization, these 2 co-ops, let the consumer who's buying from you know what's actually happening? That's question number 1. And question number 2, I'm Lisa White of the Doylestown Food Co-op. We're a startup, we don't exist yet, but one of our principles is that when you walk into our store, you will know where your food came from and how it was produced. If we're to buy from Lancaster cooperatives, which I hope we will be doing because you're local to us, how would we know that?
Well, I mean, I should say that we studied Lancaster Farm Fresh Cooperative. We are not them, or we speak for them, and they're probably. Casey is probably slightly mad that we're speaking about it at all. But the information that's out there is that the majority of their member farmers are certified organic, or there are some that use integrated pest management. So I suppose any potential customer or buyer would have to talk to Casey Spact and sort of say, okay, what are the real numbers and what's what? What they do for their CSA members is that there are a couple of sort of picnics throughout the growing season where they invite their members to come out to to one of the member farmers, and they're sort of shown the farm and can talk to the farmer, which I take to be an effort both at making the CSA members feel more connected to the whole thing, since 60 miles doesn't seem a lot, but obviously Leola, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, very different places, culturally, politically, racially, and in some ways might as well be on a sort of a different planet in terms of an urban-rural divide. Plus, you throw in the traditional sort of religious community element, and then it sort of gets to be very different. So there's some efforts along those lines, but I would imagine that very specific information would be available to any sort of institutional or major sort of buyer, or to CSA members. They have a Facebook page. There's a blog where these things are discussed. So you don't have to be, as far as I can tell, on either. You don't have to be a member to participate in those discussions. Those discussions seem to be pretty open. So again, it's this sort of theme of the co-op functioning as a kind of bridge between the traditional and the modern, the rural and the urban. There's a website that seems to be pretty open and transparent, but what actually happens on the farm without...
And just additionally, with IPM, anything that does utilize that is noted when you're purchasing it. So you would know what had IPM used, but if not, you would assume that it was organic because everything else is.
I think there's kind of two sides to it. It's around the transparency issue, and I think there's the information, the energy you're putting into putting that information out, and that's marketing and branding and education, right? And you can decide, you're making choices all along the way about how much energy you're putting into that. And then there's the issue of accountability, where if somebody comes to you and wants to know, it's your responsibility to have that information ready. I think that when we're talking about cooperatives, they are ostensibly more accountable institutions. They're accountable to their members. They're accountable to their customers. If you buy an Organic Valley product in a traditional retailer, a grocery store, you're not necessarily going to be able to say, I want to talk to the manager and I want to know all this information about where it came up. You will be able to go to the Organic Valley website and look certain things up, or maybe email their regional staff or whatever it is. So there is a certain amount of energy that can go into that. But around putting that energy out there, and now I'm putting on my Mariposa Food Co-op hat, it's a highly esoteric, the question of, it's organic, but what about, what kind of grass was it fed? Was it African grasses or local ones? And right, like that, all of that stuff, it's important and it matters, but at a certain level, there are people who don't know that you can eat raw vegetables. They think you need to cook them, right? So how much energy, when we're really talking about, issues of food sovereignty and food justice, it's also about what populations are we working with, what demographics are we working with, and who are we catering to? I think that there's already this bias toward intellectual sort of elitism, which is not to say that those aren't important questions and that we don't have the right to be asking those questions, but just that the energy we put into it, there needs to be a lot more energy that goes into other aspects of marketing. How do you cook foods? How do you eat healthier? What is even the difference between the pricing, and why make a choice between organic and conventional before we go to the level of, well, here's the whole biography of this piece of chicken that you're buying that's organic in our freezer.
I would just add something on the Organic Valley front, because I live in Wisconsin and worked with Organic Valley a lot. They have actually worked very hard to be considered beyond organic. They've pushed to have the feed standards so that dairy cows are fed a higher ratio of grass or alfalfa throughout the year. So, when you hear the things that come out about Horizon Organic, which has been accused of having organic dairy CAFOs, I think Organic Valley, as a large company, a large provider of dairy, has taken that very seriously and has worked to push the standards and to always push themselves beyond those standards. They've been really active in the domestic fair trade conversation about establishing domestic fair trade standards. So I don't know how good of a job they do at getting that out to the general public, but they're working on it. So.
So
this is a kind of a two-part question. I was curious about the labor conditions on the sort of individual farms, and the kind of, there's one level of justice is for the farms themselves, and then there's another level of justice about the workers on these farms. And so I remember reading things like about Land O'Lakes, right, where the average farm size is something like 3,000 acres or something like that. And so I guess what I also want to know is, how do you distinguish this type of producer cooperative from producer cooperatives that are for agribusinesses, right? And I don't see that you guys are for that, but I kind of want to know a little bit more about the individual farms.
Well, I think among Amish farmers, it is fair to say that labor justice is not a huge concern, right? I mean, kids go to school until the 8th grade, and then if they haven't already worked on the farm before that, which most of them will have. Say that again, please. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of fair to say that there's not a huge concern for sort of labor justice within Amish families. Kids go to school until the 8th grade. And then they go to work on the farm, if there's a farm to work on, right? Or they learn a trade to work in the town or work in sort of area businesses. Construction jobs typically sort of is a non-farm avenue for Amish kids. And it's a typical family farm. It's very gendered. It's very patriarchal, and which is one of the reasons that 1 out of the 7 kids that do leave. Often the reasons involve the sort of just the dreariness of rural work, which may not be particularly Amish, of course. I mean, I think in any sort of small family farm, there's a lot of sort of drudgery and lack of excitement and options and so on. That may not be particularly Amish, but that is not. I would imagine that is not a conversation that goes on. The conversation that does go on is around keeping people on the family farm, and keeping the farm and keeping their way of life, and maintaining that. I think that it's that sort of larger communitarian concern is what's driving the interest. And the farm size in Lancaster in this particular co-op sort of ranges from about a very small, quarter of an acre or something like that, acre to about 25 acres. So small operations. Again, as a result of this sort of endless now for several generations subdividing farms to make them ever smaller. So there's enough land to go around for all the kids.
Not being on the farms myself, I don't want to call everything suspect, but I think that even though there are not the same concerns there are around migrant labor, in Florida and the Central Valley of California, I do think that family level patriarchy in rural settings is a concern around labor. We don't know what goes on beyond that, and we don't know what kind of rights do youth have from state to state? That is really different. We don't know what those relationships are like. So patriarchy is a very serious thing, and I think that needs a little more analysis about what does this mean in terms of the site of production, in terms of the relationships there. Do we know if domestic violence is happening? Do we know if children, we don't know what happens inside of those relationships and those families and those dynamics. I'm assuming that most of them are totally fine, right? Again, I'm not trying to cast but just that that we shouldn't be like, well, it's the family, so wonderful. I think that it merits a level of critique, because the extent to which we do understand patriarchy, at least in communities that I have studied in more urban settings, there's other stuff going on. And it concerns me that there isn't more question around this, particularly because these are the people who are feeding us.
Okay, I wanted to ask a question about Organic Valley too, but focus more on the question of cooperation among cooperatives. Equal Exchange, for instance, has made it sort of part of their business model that they buy from farmer cooperatives, and then they sell to food cooperatives. Organic Valley's got annual sales of about $700 million. That's almost the size of the entire food co-op sector in the U.S., which I think is a little bit over $1 billion. What is the level of, is that part of their strategic mission? What is sort of the level of coordination in terms of the co-op movement?
Yeah, it is. The full extent to which it is, I can't get into right now, but they do work with feed mills, processing plants, warehouse facilities that are other co-ops. And in some cases, they've actually helped to start those facilities with startup capital, technical assistance. Oftentimes, they're not trying to develop them so that they can own them themselves because they're so capital intensive. It ties up a lot of capital to buy a whole processing mill. So, so their strategy has been to support the development of a sort of vertically integrated processing chain, so that as value is added to their products, that's happening through other cooperative ventures when it's possible. That's the short answer.
All right, last question.
Okay, I'm completely, I'm just a little confused on the structure as far as how the finances go in the co-ops to the farmers and everything like that, especially if you're going to have, say, you know, a very small farmer that has an acre versus someone that might have 25 acres on two ends. I guess for one, maybe for some, I guess selling to the co-op might be a supplemental income as opposed to a full-time income. Is that correct? And then
we don't know. Unfortunately, we have no data on this because the co-op refused to provide any or participate in the research, so we don't know.
For Organic Valley, it is.
Yeah, for us at least.
Yeah, they have to sell 100% of it to Organic Valley. That's
So-
the idea.
so-
So it's always small farms. You
so
don't
for
have these
organic, I
3,000
mean, but that's 100% of their sales. So it could be something that could be a side job or something, but it's not something that's. And so I guess my second question to that then is, if in Lancaster they won't, you know, give that information. What?
So Lancaster Farm,
I mean, I guess that's what's confusing me. Do they get a return or?
and I think we don't really know because we were unable to be in contact with the people running LFFC. But they do have a structure where there are 2 or 3, it's kind of gray, full-time staff members that are in charge of the business operations. And the farmers and farms that are involved with this co-op are not actually involved in the governance in the same manner as some of the worker co-ops that I saw in the last session really had a lot of, you know, committees and such. But for this, there are 3 people that are in charge of the business operations, and it's a very professional side. So we're not very sure what that extra surplus would be going to.
Okay. What about for, do you know for the organic farms? I mean, is that something where, because I mean, they have to be making a profit to keep the operation going on that has nothing to do with the farming. But then if they're buying, like, for example, how you were saying, okay, $30 for 100 gallons of milk, and then you said since 100% of it has to go towards them, if they go past the quota set for them, then they're only going to buy it at $17. But then all of a sudden, say there's sales, for some reason in the market.
I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this is a member-owned cooperative, right? So you are a small farmer who joined in 1997, and then this organic industry explodes. You now own stock in this organization that has exploded. They have a special preferred stock program for members. They actually closed it because it was too popular. But in 2004, the USDA, there's a special provision for agricultural co-ops or in Wisconsin where they were able to sell stocks to their members without being penalized, without being taxed on doing that. They were able to raise $43 million through this program. And then they were like, wonderful, we have all this extra capital. We're done now. The deal's over. So you've got your basic equity share, and then you can go above and beyond and own more stock in the company for workers or for farmers to do that. So that's just another source of revenue.
Okay.
We are out of time, but I know I'm going to be around, and I think the rest of the panelists are going to be around the rest of the day if you guys have any other questions. So let's thank our panelists and go eat some lunch.
So hard.